So I want you to just take a second and picture the year 2250. You are living aboard this massive aging orbital station called the Arkline.
Right, and it's slowly circling an Earth that everyone has basically been told is completely dead.
Exactly. And your entire life, like your everyday survival, depends entirely on machines. I mean, you are breathing recycled air, you're eating this artificial food that's just generated in a lab.
Which doesn't sound great, honestly.
No, not at all. And if you want to experience the outdoors, you walk into a quote-unquote nature room, but it's really just a room made of screens.
Yeah, just looking at simulated forests.
Right, you're listening to archived animal sounds, playing on a loop, and interacting with these mechanical systems that are just imitating a natural world that no longer exists. You have never touched real soil. You have never felt real rain.
It is a completely, sanitized, fragile existence.
Yeah.
And, well, the central tension of this whole scenario is that this fragile existence is actively collapsing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Arkline, which is humanity's last refuge, is breaking down. And the adults on board are just trapped in this endless loop of emergency maintenance, just trying to patch the leaks.
But obviously, we are not just walking you through a science fiction story today. We are exploring a 7th grade life science curriculum called Bioforge, and it uses this exact, gripping narrative as a structural framework to teach real, rigorous science to middle schoolers.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible how they weave it together.
It really is. So the mission for our deep dive today is to unpack the setting, the characters, and the educational architecture of this curriculum. We want to understand how a story about a broken future actually helps students figure out the living systems of today. Okay, let's unpack this. How do we get from a failing space station in 2250 to a middle school science classroom?
Well, the bridge between the two really lies in the specific nature of the crisis driving the story. I mean, you have to ask, if they have all this advanced technology on the Arkline, why can't they just fix the station?
Right, why not just repair it?
Exactly. So the curriculum lays out 5 major warning signs of the Arkline's failure. First, their oxygen gardens are weakening. Second, the synthetic food systems are becoming highly unstable.
Which sounds terrifying when you're trapped in space.
Oh, absolutely. Third, they are tracking a severe decline in biological health across the population, and that includes plummeting birth rates. Fourth, the general life support technology is just failing across the board.
Okay, so everything is breaking.
Everything. But the 5th sign is really the root cause of all the others. Humanity has completely lost the knowledge of how living systems actually work.
Wait, so they literally forgot how life happens. Like, they've been living in a simulation for so long that they no longer understand the mechanics of the real thing.
Pretty much. The Arkline's failure serves as this massive metaphor for bad engineering.
How so?
Well, the architects of the station copied the appearance of life. They made things that looked like trees and systems that mimicked the output of a food web, but they did it without understanding the underlying structure.
Ah, I see.
They didn't understand the biological function or the intricate interdependence of real living ecosystems. And when you only copy the surface, your system has zero resilience. When things start to break, you don't know how to repair them because you just don't know how they were truly built in the first place.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like trying to fix a shattered smartphone when you only know how to tap the glass. But you have no idea how the microchips inside actually process information.
That is a perfect analogy that hits the nail right on the head.
Yeah, you can swipe all you want, but if the motherboard is fried, tapping the screen does absolutely nothing. You have to understand the invisible mechanisms to fix the visible problem.
Right, the adults on the Arkline are basically just tapping shattered glass. But the narrative introduces a major turning point here. Hidden deep within the station's fragmented AI is an archive called Bioforge.
And this archive wasn't created in space, right?
No, it was created long ago, back on Earth, specifically in Homer, Alaska.
Wow, okay. So the Bioforge archive holds the preserved knowledge of the old world. It contains everything they've forgotten, like how to gather evidence, the structure of cells, the rules of inheritance and adaptation, the complexity of ecosystems, and, most importantly, the principles of restoration.
But it's not like a textbook they can just download into their brains.
Right. The archive comes with this impossible instruction. It says, to repair the future, return to the living past, learn how Earth worked before it died, bring back the code of life.
So they have to actually go back. And since the adults are completely consumed with, just keeping the station from falling out of orbit.
Patching those leaks.
Exactly. And because the AI requires human observation to unlock the archive's secrets, they send 6 young cadets. And this is where the curriculum introduces its protagonists, the Eco Squad. And by extension, it introduces the students to different scientific methodologies.
Which causally brings the students into the story.
Right. The curriculum doesn't just hand the students a random list of characters. It meticulously maps these 6 cadets to different scientific mindsets, which directly align with the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS. It is just a masterclass in providing diverse entry points into scientific inquiry.
Okay, so instead of just listing off names, let's look at how this team is specifically engineered to function together. You have Mika Sovolik, who is careful, highly skeptical, and entirely devoted to evidence. And she's paired with Talik Nanukortali, who is mechanical, hands-on, and just fascinated by how systems work.
Right.
They basically form the micro-level foundation of the team.
Because Mika represents that demand for empirical proof, organizing the field journals, questioning assumptions, while Tali provides the lens of structure and function. Tali is the student who needs to actually see the machinery of the cell, to understand that life has a physical architecture.
He's the builder.
Yeah, and you just can't figure out a biological mechanism without Mika's rigorous observation and Tali's structural analysis.
Okay, then you move to the macro and temporal scales. You have Ayana Reyes-Nukapigak, who is artistic, reflective, and deeply curious about identity and inheritance.
Mm-hmm.
And she's right alongside Rowan Chen Kusagak, who is bold, restless, and a total pattern seeker drawn to fossils and clues in the field.
Right. So Ayana connects microscopic DNA to macro-level questions of who we are, making the study of genetics deeply personal.
Oh, I love that.
And Rowan, on the other hand, is the guide into natural selection and adaptation. By reading the history left behind in dirt and bones, he sees how things change over deep time. So together, they tackle how life persists and evolves.
And then finally, you have the systems thinkers. Sage Williams-Kayak is highly social, relational, and incredibly skilled at noticing connections in networks. And Noor Patel Tutu is inventive, strategic, and always eager to design restoration solutions.
Sage is basically the ecologist looking at the whole, realizing no organism lives in isolation, and mapping out the interdependent relationships in food webs. Noor takes all that knowledge gathered by the other 5 and applies an engineering mindset to it. She embodies the design standards, asking how they can use this biological data to actually reduce harm and build a better system.
So they're essentially a fully functioning scientific method split into 6 personalities.
Exactly. But they aren't sent back to Earth completely alone. They have an AI companion named Lumen.
Right, but Lumen got damaged during the jump back to the past. It can translate things, store evidence, ask questions, and flag weak reasoning, but it cannot solve the science for them.
And what's fascinating here is that Lumen's limitations act as the engine for the curriculum's formative assessment. In typical sci-fi, the AI is, a supercomputer that just calculates the answer and saves the day.
Right, it does the work for the heroes.
Exactly. But in Bioforge, Lumen relies entirely on a Socratic method.
Oh, wow. So instead of a teacher just handing out a pop quiz, Lumen is actively checking the student's understanding while they are right in the middle of a task. That shifts the cognitive load entirely onto the student.
That is the core mechanism. Lumen won't say, here is the structure of a plant cell. Because it's damaged, it processes student input and returns prompts like claim detected, reasoning missing, or alternate explanation possible.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, it forces the cadets, and therefore the 7th graders, to continually revise their models and strengthen their arguments using empirical data.
So what does this all mean? I mean, we've established these great characters and these massive sci-fi stakes, but how does this actually look for a 7th grader on a random Tuesday morning?
Yeah.
Because they aren't actually time traveling and they aren't interacting with the real AI. How does a teacher translate this into a physical classroom experience?
Well, the transition from the narrative to the classroom relies on the students essentially acting as the cadets. Every single part of the story connects directly to a tangible life science activity. They aren't just passively receiving facts from a whiteboard, they are keeping incredibly detailed field journals, just like Mika.
Right.
They are conducting real, hands-on investigations, analyzing data sets, and reading complex scientific texts.
Could you give me a concrete example of how they use models in this context?
Yeah.
The outline mentions they use physical and digital models. How does that actually play out when they're, trying to fix a space station?
Sure, let's look at the Arkline's failing water filtration system. In the narrative, the cadets need to understand how to filter toxins without losing essential nutrients. In the classroom, the teacher doesn't just hand out a worksheet on cell membranes. The students use digital models to manipulate the permeability of a simulated membrane.
Oh, they actually see it working.
Right, watching how different sized molecules interact with the barrier. And then they move to physical models, perhaps using dialysis tubing in a lab to actually filter different solutions.
No way.
They have to map the physical behavior of that selectively permeable membrane back to the biological function of a real cell, and then apply that principle to Noor's engineering problem of fixing the Arkline's filtration.
So they are building portfolios of their work, reflecting on their growth, and demonstrating mastery by showing their evidence. They are arguing from evidence, not just filling in a bubble on a multiple-choice test. It basically transforms the classroom from a static lecture hall into a laboratory, a field station, and a design studio.
Exactly. And the next generation science standards specifically mandate a shift from just learning about a topic to actively figuring out observable phenomena.
Right, there's a big difference there.
A huge difference. When you just learn about science, you memorize vocabulary. When you figure out science, you engage in the struggle of inquiry. You make a claim, you test it, you fail, you revise. The Bioforge curriculum uses the narrative of a broken space station to really enforce that cycle of failure and revision.
Okay, I understand the mechanics of the classroom labs, but I want to look at the psychology of the narrative itself for a second. Why go through the trouble of building this massive, elaborate storyline about the year 2250? Why not just say, today we're figuring out cell membranes, here are the microscopes?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the narrative framework solves a major issue in middle school education, which is coherence. A typical school year often feels like just a disjointed series of random units to a 12-year-old.
Yeah, that's true.
You study cells in October, genetics in January, and ecosystems in April. The students don't naturally see how they connect. But the Bioforge storyline links everything together sequentially. You literally can't understand the genetic mutations happening to the Arkline's crops until you understand the cells that has the DNA. And you can't understand ecosystems until you understand how those genetics adapt to changing environments over time.
So it provides a persistent context. And from a cognitive perspective, humans are wired for story. We encode information much more effectively when it's attached to an emotional state or a spatial environment. By attaching the abstract concept of cellular respiration to the urgent emotional stakes of saving the Arkline's oxygen gardens, the facts actually stick in the hippocampus.
Furthermore, the narrative heavily supports universal design for learning. By featuring 6 different characters with very distinct cognitive profiles, the curriculum provides multiple routes into rigorous learning.
Right, so if a student struggles with, say, the mathematical abstraction of population data,
They might connect more with Ayana's reflective approach to inheritance or Tali's hands-on mechanical building. It validates multiple ways of processing information while keeping everyone focused on the exact same scientific problem.
okay, I have to push back here for a second. In theory, this sounds absolutely amazing. But in practice, 7th graders are chaotic. Is there a serious risk that this elaborate sci-fi story actually distracts from the real-world science? I mean, you give a 12-year-old a story about a space station, and they might spend the entire year drawing spaceships and entirely forget to learn about Earth biology. How does the curriculum keep them grounded?
That is a very critical challenge in any narrative-based curriculum. If the story overwhelms the science, the educational value just collapses. But the designers anticipated this by ensuring the sci-fi frame is strictly the engine for engagement, not the destination.
Okay.
The actual scientific inquiry is deeply anchored in real, localized Alaskan phenomena. So the archive isn't pulling data from alien planets, it's pulling data from Homer, Alaska. So how does a student use the cadet framework to solve a localized Alaskan problem? Let's trace that mechanism.
Sure. Let's look at the unit on ecosystems and permafrost collapse. In the narrative, the Arkline synthetic environment is losing its structural integrity, and the cadets are tasked with understanding how real environments maintain stability. But in the classroom, the students aren't studying fictional space dirt. They step into Sage's shoes as ecologists to study rapid permafrost degradation right in the Alaskan tundra.
Because permafrost isn't just frozen dirt, right? It's a structural foundation that stores massive amounts of carbon and water.
Right. The students look at real data sets showing how rising temperatures thaw the permafrost, which creates these collapsed scars that physically drain wetlands.
Mm.
They literally trace the causality. The ground thaws, the water drains, local vegetation dies, and the herbivores that rely on that vegetation either migrate or starve. The students map this cascading failure through the local food web. And then they switch to Nora's engineering mindset. They study the 11,000-year-old stone tidal weirs built by ancient Tlingit engineers. Oh yeah, I read about those in the source material. The Tlingit weirs are a perfect contrast to the Arkline.
Exactly.
Because the Arkline was built by people who copied nature without understanding it. But the tidal weirs were built by people who deeply understood the mechanics of the ecosystem. I mean, the weirs allow the Tlingit to harvest fish, but they are specifically designed to let the smaller, younger fish escape to ensure the population's survival. It is just an incredible engineering solution based on ecological balance.
Right, and so the students analyzed the structural design of those ancient weirs to understand how human intervention can support, rather than destroy, a living system. They used that historical real-world data to propose localized mitigation strategies for the permafrost collapse. The awe and urgency of the sci-fi story lure them in, but the cognitive work forces them to intensely focus on the real, breathing, complex environment of Alaska.
They lure you in with a spaceship, and suddenly you're passionately debating the structural integrity of tundra wetlands and the population dynamics of Pacific salmon navigating rivers based on genetic memory. And I want to remind you, the listener, that we are not going to spoil the final solution of the curriculum today. We aren't going to reveal if they actually save the Arkline or what the ultimate secret of the Bioforge archive is.
No spoilers here. The joy and really the pedagogical value is entirely in the figuring out. The story is designed to mimic the struggle and revision inherent in real scientific inquiry. The cadets do not get it right the first time, and neither will the students. Confusion is not treated as a failure in this curriculum. It is treated as the necessary starting point of the work.
Which brings us to the moment that kicks off that entire year of work, the arrival. I want to bring you to the very first moment of the cadets' mission. The Eco Squad has just jumped from the sterile, perfectly temperature-controlled, artificially lit corridors of the Arkline, and they arrive in present-day Homer, Alaska. And it is a total sensory shock.
Oh, imagine stepping out of a sanitized metal tube where you have lived your entire life. They have never felt moving air. They step out, and the wind is actually biting at their faces. They step off the transport, and their boots sink into sticky, wet mud.
They smell the intense, briny odor of low tides. Biting insects are swarming them. There are plants everywhere, decaying leaves, rich, dark soil. The sheer volume of sensory data is overwhelming. It is messy, it's breathing, it's deeply interconnected, and it is entirely outside of their control.
It is the terrifying and beautiful reality of a true living system. And in that exact moment, they realize the terrifying scale of what they do not know.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This overwhelming, messy, chaotic natural world is exactly what these 7th grade students will spend the entire academic year decoding. They have to look at that mud, that tide, those insects, and those plants, and find the biological patterns, the cellular structures, and the genetic rules that govern it all.
Because the fundamental lesson of Bioforge is that you cannot save something you do not understand. You cannot build a resilient future if you do not comprehend the complex webs of cause and effect that sustain life in the present.
It is a massive intellectual undertaking for a middle schooler, but they have the structural tools, they have a compelling narrative that demands their attention, and they have a clear mission. So, we leave you with the central haunting question of the Bioforge curriculum. It's a question not just for the cadets, and not just for the students, but for all of us looking out at our own rapidly changing planet. Think about the sheer complexity of the natural world outside your window right now. What would you need to understand before you could repair a living world?